This is Brazos Valley Vets, an archive visit with a military veteran from the Brazos Valley. Now, here's your host, Tom Turbyville.
Brazos Valley Voices is very proud of its relationship with the Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial. It's tucked away in College Station's Veterans Park and Athletic Complex at 3101 Harvey Road. It's a hidden gem for sure, a 12-acre site dedicated to veterans from our nation's major wars. The Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial includes life-size statues, a wall of honor, interpretive panels, and memorial sites. It was chartered in 2000 as a nonprofit corporation. The Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial is supported by generous community residents, organizations, and partners, including Brazos County and the municipalities of Bryan and College Station. The Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial's all-volunteer board of directors proudly contributes their time and resources to salute our veterans. Their mission is to proactively pay tribute to veterans through an educational venue where future generations can learn that freedom comes with a heavy price. Former President George H.W. Bush helped dedicate the Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial on November the 10th, 2002. Bush said at the time, "The Brazos Valley community can stand proud. The names that mark the memorial showcase the sons and daughters who gave dedicated service to our nation so that future generations can share the freedoms we enjoy. Their task was great, their sacrifice even greater, but their legacy stands firm, and their memories burn bright." Bush later said the Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial is a similar quality to those at the famed mall in Washington, D.C. Within the Lewis L. Adam Memorial Plaza sits the 250-ton red granite Wall of Honor, which serves as the memorial's focal point. The wall bears the etched names of more than 5,000 veterans representing all periods of U.S. history who are family and friends of Brazos Valley residents. Notable names include 24 presidents and former Texas A&M University students who received the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military award. The bronze sculpture mounted at the top of the wall depicts a GI carrying a fellow soldier to safety. The statue is the work of artist Robert Eccleston of Schuyler Falls, New York. Do you have a beloved veteran that you would like to add to the Wall of Honor? The veteran may be living, deceased, or active, and does not have to be a Brazos Valley resident. The cost is $150 per name, and the application deadline each year is August the 15th. New additions are recognized at the annual Veterans Day ceremony. Names received after August 15th will be recognized the following year. For more information on adding your loved ones or your name to the Brazos Valley Veterans Memorial Wall of Honor, contact the BVVM at 979-696-6247 or email them info@bvvm.org. Or you can go to their fantastic website. It's easy, bvvm.org. Hello and welcome to another edition of Brazos Valley Voices. Today we visit with another veteran of World War II. His name was Cal Boykin, a proud member of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion in World War II's European theater. He can best tell its story because he was a historian for his unit, as well as a gunner aboard his M8 Armoured car on recon duty, mostly patrolling the French roads behind Normandy, through Belgium and Holland, and on to Germany. During the taping of Veterans of the Valley on KAMU, Cal Boykin's story was so amazing it took 2 episodes to tell the whole story. Cal Boykin, an amazing story of service. We lost Cal Boykin on October the 23rd, 2008. This interview happened on June the 7th, 2007. Here is my visit with Cal Boykin. All I know really about you is that you were part of the 814th, Armored Division, is that right?
Tank Destroyer.
Tank Destroyer Division.
Battalion.
Right, in Europe, right?
Right, and we were attached to the 7th Armored Division.
I see.
Never heard of them until we got to France.
Yeah. Well, let's go back farther than that. Tell me about where you grew up and what got you to A&M and sort of.
Well, I was born in New Mexico, Roswell,
Right.
in 1924. So I'm what 83, I guess.
Right.
And everybody asked me, I was born in Roswell.
Right.
So I say, well, I was born 12 years after New Mexico became a state, and a long time before the ETs landed. But we didn't live in New Mexico. My father was in the hotel business.
Right.
And we moved to Carlsbad for a while. Then and I really grew up at Big Spring in West Texas.
Sure.
And although I lived with my grandmother for a while in Rochelle near Brady, when Earl Rudder was coaching high school football there, I guess.
Right. Okay. Great.
In Brady, and had the drugstore and so on. But then I moved back with my parents and graduated from Big Spring High School. And well, I had the idea. Of course, it was getting pretty close, things were heating up quite a bit, and I said, well, I've got to get some military training.
Right.
Well, earlier I had, at 16, I was enrolled in a ground school course. If I was one of the top 10, I could get into Air Corps training. But I was 16, it should have been 18, but and it never amounted to anything. But then I said, well, I'll come to A&M. Well, I stayed over and played football the next year at Big Spring. And but I graduated. I was 18. They just started drafting 18-year-olds the following November. So I entered A&M in June of 42.
June of 42. Okay.
So I was class 46. And then when the draft really got after us, 18-year-olds, why then old president of A&M wanted to say, you boys stay in, they'll call you when they're ready for you and all that. And I understand he had courses in defense work that you could take for non-credit, but it would prepare you to get into the defense industry.
Right.
And I didn't know anything about that, didn't care too much about it, but then the other thing, you could get into the enlisted reserve corps, volunteer, become part of the Army, and stay in school, and perhaps get a commission, be there long enough. Well, I didn't do that. I went back home and talked to my draft board, and they said, if you volunteer, you can get your choice of branch of service. Well, Air Corps, of course. Well, I got to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. I was inducted at Lubbock and up to Fort Sill. Why? They said, well, forget about that V for volunteer. We said, we'll send you where we want you. So I ended up at Camp Hood for Tank Destroyer Replacement Training Center. And that's when General Bruce gave us a little pep talk. And he was a major general then, and I was much impressed. But anyway, I ended up at on maneuvers with the 814th and Tank Destroyer Battalion, self-propelled. It had the M10 tank destroyer, although I ended up in reconnaissance company, and I was gunner on an M8 Armoured car. That's 6 wheels, tires, and so on. 37 millimeter gun, coaxially mounted 30 caliber machine gun. And
I see.
so, although at that point we didn't have that weapon, we didn't get that until we landed in England. And we, following the maneuvers, we sailed from Halifax on the Isle de France, the big troop ship. It was converted from the luxury liner.
Yeah. How long a trip was that? How long a trip was that?
That was about 7 days.
About 7 days.
We
it was
made
on
it
a converted luxury liner?
by ourselves, zigzag all across.
Right.
No problem.
Yeah.
And heavy seas at times, but no. But it was manned by a British crew.
I see.
And the food was terrible. But and I didn't get sick.
Okay.
And we ended up in Birmingham near there at a place called Packington Park.
In France?
In England.
In England, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And we were there about 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved down on the coast to prepare for the invasion, and we thought we were going to be part of the invasion. But what had happened, it had service troops that were feeding the invasion troops, and they were getting sick. The sanitation, they were taking care of procedures and all. Mm-hmm. So we ended up cooking and pulling security guard for the troops that made the invasion.
I see.
And so which meant we were inspected. I mean, inspected everything. We had to be camouflaged, stay on the beaten path, and all that. And I'll say here, I was 19 at the time, and here I thought these kids came, to make the invasion. It looked to me like, but they had their morale was high.
Right.
It really was.
Right. Right.
And I never will forget a corporal got up on the stage before the movie started in a little tent show, and he recited all the verses of the Unknown Soldier. And he said, "I am the unknown soldier, and maybe I died in vain, but if I were alive and my country called, I'd do it all over again."
Yeah.
And boy, they cheered.
Well, wow. Wow.
But anyway, it was a time.
Right.
And of course, I had never been home since I left in February of 43 to enter the Army. And I was supposed to have gotten a furlough, but I didn't. And anyway, here I was.
Yeah.
And that battalion, a lot of machinery and all that. Most of these fellows were older than I was. Some in their 30s.
Right.
But they had been truck drivers, mechanics. They were specialized. They were well trained before they went in. Of course, most of them married with children even. And I thought, well, I don't think we're going to go over. I think they're going to just forget about us. But we did. We landed. We got a LST, that landing ship tank.
Right.
Rode on there. I think it was in Weymouth. Is on anyway, right? One of those port cities. Now we were close to Dorchester in Dorset, and just biding our time. But when we loaded, and we landed on Utah Beach, and they still had the barrage balloons affixed to the LST and so on, but we didn't see any trouble.
Right.
And it was on August the 8th of 44.
August 8th.
August the 8th.
Okay.
And then we found out we were part of Patton's Third Army. And by the 13th we had got word we were attached to the 7th Armored Division.
Okay.
And so I thought, well, we'll rest here a little bit and get some briefings on what's been going on and what we need to know and so on. But no, we were moved on up the first morning we took off.
I see.
But the breakthrough had taken place, and those armored columns were moving. And at times, we would be in the lead as recon, but not too often, I'd say. And I was concerned. I said, what about our flight? I expected a broad action, combined arms, with the with the infantry and artillery and the planes and then the tanks and all. No, it was single file.
I'll be darned.
And but they did. They pulled us on the flank to kind of as a warning system, I guess, if anything happened on the flanks.
Right.
And then we were to kind of clean up these little villages that had been bypassed. A lot of them, they just roared right on and forgot about it.
Right.
And there were Germans there.
Yeah.
And we were the first in our battalion, as far as I know, to take prisoners.
I see.
We ran into a place there and we picked up a couple of them.
I'll be darned.
And
did you run into any resistance?
well, they were not on their machine gun like they should have been. They were back in the orchard shooting the breeze with the French woman. And we rode with rubber tires and everything, and all they saw us, they threw up their hands.
Probably by the middle of August, they probably figured it was all done.
They were ready to come in anyway.
Right. Yeah. Oh yeah. That's what I've always heard. They were ready to surrender rather than go to a camp or something.
Sure, that's right.
Yeah.
And but we really we got into it on 18th of August when my platoon was to lead a task force, armored task force, into Rambouillet. Now that is the summer home of French presidents. And it's been a meeting place of some of these conferences and so on. But of course at that time, all I was telling my crew, I said, this is where the Rambouillet sheep came from. And I guess it was.
Right.
But about that time we heard that there was a cavalry group just ahead of us that had been ambushed. And the day before, and they'd pulled out, and there we were coming. And one of the cavalrymen, he hollered at me, he says, what's that 88? You know, well, that got our attention, but it fired on us. And there's a big wall on our left-hand side, and it went through the wall, and of course, rocks and stuff all over us. And of course, everybody says, back up. The driver backed right into the wall. And I was ready to fire, just generally. And about that time, it fired again. And I could see it was a fallow, oat or wheat field, I guess, and a lot of dust. It looked like a torpedo just skimming the top of and it went underneath us and hit the wall and kind of tore up some of our tires. But anyway, then I was ready to fire, and all of a sudden my lieutenant, he was just ahead of me, and his driver, and I had my sights on, and I could see them all of a sudden. So I held back, and then I just kind of fired from the hip. Well, that armor-piercing 37 millimeter shell just probably went over them 30 feet or more, and gave us a chance to back off and get away.
Right.
But there had been 7 cavalrymen and some engineers killed in that ambush. Now, you may remember Colonel Vernon Files, College Station school teacher.
Yes, sir.
All right, he was a lieutenant, and he was leading a task force on the other side of this castle. And he lost a lieutenant in their ambush. And a lady from France, she lived at Rambouillet, but she didn't grow up there. But she did write a book about the liberation of Rambouillet. So she and her husband came, visited us here. We got Colonel Files over here. We got our maps out, and we got it all figured. So she wrote a very fine book. And in the meantime, the citizens erected a monument there, American Eagle Monument, which had all the names. Finally, because this lady had found the names and everything. And that included a pilot, a P-47 Thunderbolt pilot. I saw his plane come down in flames just above me, right like that. Well, this lady finally got survivors from those that were killed to come to Rambouillet for the ceremony.
Right.
Well, the sister of that pilot came, and I later was in contact with her. She was from Illinois, but she'd come down to South Texas for the winter, and I visited with her just a few years ago. And
wow.
Now these are things that happen, that local people are doing things, just like this trip I made last week. Local people are doing things for us still. They got us in mind. And even the French, we don't think they think about us, but some do. Some do.
Exactly. I've heard that.
And so we went on to just outside of Metz, and that's where Market Garden had happened up in Holland.
Right.
And it was not a successful operation. So we were transferred to Holland to support as part of the British Second Army, although we were also part-time with the American Ninth Army. It was just getting into action. And so we fought from September till sometime in November in Holland's Peel Marshes. It's a real messy area, which was farmland most altogether, and a lot of sugar beets, apples. But you go back today, why, they're raising asparagus and, of course, still apples under a little different system, and potatoes and so on, and some sugar beets. But and a lot of industry coming up in that area. So it's developing. You can hardly recognize that. But it was pretty tough there for quite a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
and then, let's see, then we moved up into Germany along the Ruhr River, and we had, now the tank destroyers by that time were drawing a heavier gun. Now the M10 had a 3-inch gun, and it was diesel powered, open turret, and lightly armored, and a little faster and so on, lower profile. But the M36, which was the same vehicle except they had to modify the turret to accommodate a 90 millimeter gun. And we were doing a lot of indirect fire, our gun companies were. And so we pulled security guard, reconnaissance did, for these tank destroyers as they fired into their targets. And it was pretty miserable. The weather, was bad, rain and cold.
Because we're getting close to the bulge now.
Yeah, and that's where we got word on the 17th that morning to move out.
Of November?
Of December.
December, okay.
Yeah, the bulge started on the 16th of December.
Right.
Well, we thought, we'd been here. Half of us were sick because we were been housed up in one of those pill boxes the Germans had been driven out of. And a lot of us had flu and whatnot. And said, we're going to a rest camp. And we knew Belgium was clear. So we moved on and down. When we got to Verviers, we went down in 2 columns. And when we got to Verviers, I thought, this is the rest camp. I remember somebody said that. But the civilians were out there all shouting and everything, move on, don't stop. And as it turned out, one column was passing along Normandy, and there was a forward observer artillery battalion, that 285th I think it was. But they were kind of disjointed, and they moved in our column. And as we moved, that was where Colonel Pfeiffer's, it was more than a task force, I can't remember what the size, it hit our column right where those artillerymen were. And that's where that Normandy massacre got its name. Actually, the actual site is at Bockness, or Bonnet, I think they call it. And I've seen different figures, everything from 70 to 90. They were machine gunned and then shot there. And that was part of our column at that time. And the policy right then, I suppose, was to get that word out that this is what had happened, and that we better be on our best, take note of that. But the odd thing was, very soon it was said this was the Rundstedt offensive. The commander Rundstedt, an old officer, he was pretty much in command, but it didn't have anything to do with him. This was Hitler's plan.
I see.
And and the books now say Hitler's last gamble, on and on. Well, it almost worked.
Right.
But and we formed as best we could a horseshoe defense. Now we were with Combat Command B of the 7th Armored Division, and with Combat Command R Reserve, and Brigadier General Bruce Clark, who had just taken command. He had been with the 4th Armored, one of Patton's favorites, and we needed a shot in the arm, and he came, and I think he kind of gave us a little more of a boost, and we held that for 6 days. We were supposed to hold it for 3. We managed to hold it for 6. And then the controversies began because General Matthew Ridgway, he came in as our Corps commander at the last moment. He was a paratrooper, of course, and it was the 18th Corps, I think, and so he ordered us to hold, and they would supply us by air like they did at Bastogne. Well, Bastogne was infantry. Here were tanks, so you couldn't begin to supply us. And so our division commander, Hasbrook, he said, we're not out of here by dark. We're gone. They've taken us. Clark says, well, boy, this is Custer's last stand. And then General Hogue of the 9th Armored Division, an old timer that kind of could put the screws to Ridgway, even though he was a underling, he did. He let him have it. That he still got infantry. Wake up. And so they said, well, maybe we'll let him come out. But the other story is, see, Montgomery was took command of Bradley's 12th Army Group, and because of the communications problems, so he sent his lieutenants down. They came back and said, well, they're going to sacrifice that division. Of course, Montgomery, well, we need to tidy up this line. Let's get these boys out. and we came out. But the problem was, here was recon, and they'd formed Task Force Jones, named after our battalion commander, Robert Bruce Jones of Georgia, a lawyer and a good man. And I remember him on the radio. Well, we were going to fight a rearguard action while the rest made their getaway. Well, we took 4 tank destroyers with their 90 millimeters, and they held for a little bit. But we were secondary, and so we picked up what stragglers we could, and we were going to head out. And this was near Somme-Certeau, and that was west of St. Vith. We already left St. Vith, but or Saint Vith, as they say. and then we got going down this column, and up at Vielson. That was a tough spot. Well, the 82nd Airborne had come up on cattle trucks and whatnot to get behind us, and we were to pull back behind them, and together we would make a stand and do better. And all of a sudden, you could look down, and 2 of our light tanks from the 17th Tank Battalion of the 7th Armored, they went up in smoke from gunfire from that Vielson area. Well, the Germans, we assumed, had come in and set up their guns there, while the 82nd Airborne half occupied that town. And I've seen the combat interviews with Colonel Jones, our task force commander. He said those guns that knocked our tanks out belonged to 82nd Airborne. They were 57 millimeter. And in the meantime, artillery was coming down. I saw this spotter plane, this L5, kind of a Piper thing, and he came over us kind of like that, and then I could see yellow. See, our tracers were kind of orange color. Theirs were the yellow, the Germans, and they were just across the road up on a little hill, and they were trying to knock that plane out of the air. Well, he got away, but what he was doing, he was calling in fire on us, and here came the artillery. Well, according to the interview, why Colonel Jones raced back there and got that stopped.
I bet.
And then we were cut off like this. We took off to fire guards, and then finally, I don't know how, we were wringing our hands what to do. You know, I'd taken pictures that I favored and put them in my pockets. I had a little New Testament Bible. I stuck that in my, need that. I had a chocolate bar, one of the D bars, stuff that. Got some extra carbine ammunition. I said, they're not going to catch me. If they do, it'll be hell to pay. And but anyway, I could hear that colonel call and says, "Burn your vehicles and get out of there. Come on out on foot," you know. And so we were going to save our armored car, we thought, and we ran across a clearing there at this spot above Vielsen, near St. Marie, I think it was. And but it was a kind of a marshy area, which had frozen over, and then our armored car fell through the ice. We didn't have chains on. Why, I don't know. And but we tried to put chains on. Well, that was useless.
Right.
We had to take an axe to even break the chains up to where we could even. Then I'd given the driver an incendiary grenade, and I said, "Well, let's just burn it." Our sergeant had disappeared, so he couldn't find the grenade. And I said, "Well, I'll go get." I ran as fast as I could, heavy overcoat, you know, and all that stuff through deep snow. Got to the lieutenant's Jeep, and I said, "Let me have another one of those grenades." So he gave it to me, and I headed back. Just as I got back, I found those other two monkeys, the driver and the radio operator. They were stuffing rags down the gas tank, and they're sitting there trying to light it with a cigarette lighter. And it flamed up, you know, and about that time, a straggler came rushing by and said, "That tank's going to fire on you in a minute." So we dropped everything and ran. Of course, I guess, I don't know how far we got before the German fired and knocked it out, you know, put a round through it. It didn't burn. Surprised me, according to what, you know, they make a survey of these after things.
Right.
And I had taken my firing pin out. It had fallen to the floor, and I didn't have time to get down there and get it, so I just took the retainer cap and put that in my pocket. I said, "He can't fire without that." And so off we went. But even before that, as we were still mounted, we got to this T in the road, and there was a lieutenant, American, that hollered and says, "Take the right, back toward Vielsen." And so we went a few, maybe 100 yards, and we said, "This is not right." We turned around and came back. But the others that went on, they were ambushed, captured. We had 20 missing from our task force that night, and most of them got caught. And so one of the prisoners turned out, we saw each other years later at the reunion. He said, "You know, that guy was a German, I think." I said, "You know, he must have been. I remember he was so sure of himself." But anyway, we finally got out, and I said, "Well, I don't have a vehicle, so maybe I can rest a little bit here." Well, it wasn't but next day, why, I had another one. And I'll show you. See, this is my replacement vehicle by odd circumstance.
That's your
It came out on that George Forty book on armored fighting vehicles on the dust jacket, and that's our crew. I'm the one with the helmet in the turret, and
this one here. That's you.
Yeah. Yeah, I could recognize the rest of that crew. I knew them exactly. A couple of them wouldn't wear helmets, and that was.
When was this book published?
Oh, it was 5 or 6 years ago, I think, 4 or 5. My brother-in-law in Dickinson, he spotted that, and he kind of, and I got it, and I said, "God golly, I guess that's us." got 8/14 on. You can hardly see it on front.
Yeah, I can see it. 814.
Yeah, but see, there's no other identification. That's a replacement vehicle.
Right.
They didn't know where it was going other than our battalion. So you didn't have recon company or vehicle number so and so.
Right. So you don't know where this was taken necessarily.
No, we've tried to figure it out, and it just. I did get the original of that, which was
the original picture.
Yeah, and it included the broader scene. It shows two artillery prime movers. One of them is stuck, and the other's trying to pull it across out of the mud, and the chain is on the ground because they lowered the chain so we could pass. And but never been able to say just where. But I know it was after the 20. See, we got out on the 23rd that night, and I think we were ready to go at least by the 27th. And
wow. And you were a turret gunner, right?
I was. They made me a sergeant. See, the sergeant rides over on that side and loads the gun, and he commands a half of the platoon. The buck sergeant is a section sergeant in our case.
Right.
And so I took the place of our sergeant, who became a platoon leader, and our platoon leader became first sergeant.
Yeah.
And we had replacements were scarce.
Wow. Okay, and then where'd you go? What happened from there?
Pardon?
What happened from here now?
Well, let's see. Luckily, they put us on working with engineers, repairing roads, digging the little outlets, and filling in ruts and so on. That was a break.
Yeah.
And then it was a lot of patrolling. And it's only then that I realized how big this battle really was, because there were bodies coming out. The snow began to, and German, American, all over the place.
Right.
And I remember moving up a little bit north to Rockruth, where the 2nd Infantry and the 99th Infantry, and I saw a lot of dead.
Yeah.
And then in Bullingen, we were passing through, and we ended up staying there for a few days. But I looked from my turret, and I saw maybe a dozen or two bodies, American soldiers, parallel lying there, and somebody shooting pictures. And that upset me. I just yelled out, I said, God, don't you have anything better to do? Well, what it was, that was another massacre, over 100. And I'm sure that was the investigating team making their records.
Right.
So there were massacres all over, and one included 33rd Artillery Battalion. I think they had the 240 millimeter guns of the 106th Infantry that had been new division, got hit a few days after their two regiments captured up on the Snee Eifel. But on the 17th or 19th, some of these soldiers of the 33rd, and they were African Americans, and they took 11 of them up a little hill up there and shot them, right just out of hand, just shot them. Now, last week I went to the memorial for those soldiers.
Right.
As I also went to Bognes or Bonnet near Malmedy to honor the memorial for those soldiers. So.
Was that in Belgium or?
Pardon?
Was that in Holland or Belgium?
Well, both of them Holland.
In Holland,
yeah. I mean, no, I'm sorry. Both of them were Belgium.
In Belgium.
Yeah, Belgium. And so, and of course, there's a lot going on in Luxembourg, at the same time.
Right.
And well, that was, they say, the biggest battle the Americans ever fought anywhere.
Yeah.
But even some of these wouldn't compare what the Russians had to fight.
Right.
And their casualty
Oh, sure.
on both sides.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
now, one thing, at that period, why the Russians began making their offensive,
Mm-hmm.
and which was quite a relief to us, a morale booster.
Mm-hmm.
But, and I don't remember now, not too much really after that, except just patrolling, just ordinary stuff, and some artillery coming in every once in a while somewhere, and then we got through the sea, got to the Rhine at Remagen, and by the time we got there, the bridge had already fallen, and troops were crossing on pontoon bridges, and but our guns, our 90 millimeters, they were held on the west side for indirect fire across the river, and they, I don't know, pretty effective fire, I guess, in the long run, but a lot of wildwoods too, of course, but and it fired for a long time. And I got a letter from a World War I veteran, the father of a good friend of mine, from Rochelle, and he said, you know, he was a supply sergeant, commanded a truck group thing. He said, you know, at 1919, during the occupation of Germany, we were near a place called Remagen. Have you ever heard of it, or maybe you've seen it? And there I was.
Wow.
And that's the same family that during the balls, and this was the worst part of it, we got, somehow the mail came through in packages, and there was my fruitcake from them.
I'll be darned.
Fresh.
Wow. Yeah, the fruitcake that wouldn't go bad, huh?
Yeah. Like, you know, that movie Battle of the Bulls, when the German general looks and says, my God, we've lost the war. They've sent him fresh fruitcakes. But we crossed finally on those pontoon bridges, and we were getting ready to move out on this Gruer pocket. I mean, it was kind of a cleanup, I guess, and it was a massive surrender of troops. The casualties were light, but all of a sudden, we had to camouflage, well, some trees, branches, you know, and so on our vehicle, and the motors were running and ready to go, and here came our platoon sergeant, and he waving a sheet of paper at me, says, hey, Washington, you want to go to England? I said, oh, you bet. I didn't ask anybody. I didn't look to my lieutenant, who I really, this is a strange case. I like my lieutenant.
Right.
He was a great one.
Yeah.
And mild-mannered Italian. He was Italian-American.
What was his name?
From Illinois. Named Fuca, F-U-C-A. And he would be in his Jeep ahead of me as we moved. And I could tell when things were getting bad, because they're baby shoes from his little grandson, hanging on the glove compartment now. And he'd reach up and squeeze those shoes.
Wow.
And I said, oh, good God. Because he wouldn't worry us with a lot of details, although perhaps he should have. But we kind of read his messages like that.
Right.
But I didn't even ask him what I'd go on. I just took off. I loaded up a pack, and some of those boys brought me some silk stockings and things, you know, or addresses of girlfriends and so on. And I was gone. And first time I saw the rear echelon, I mean, my gosh, that's where all the soldiers were.
Right. Right.
And well, went to Verviers, our rest camp area, and got cleaned up and shined my shoes. We got 2 little stripes here, meaning we've been overseas a year. And we had 2 battle stars on our campaign ribbon. And we were real shaped up. And then by train to Le Havre and there to Southampton. And I caught the train to Birmingham. Well, I found out my girlfriend there had married, and so I took off the next morning for Edinburgh, Scotland. Spent the rest of my days up there, and then back and hit my Liberty ship, and then back to Verviers, and then finally the trucks picked me up. There were 7 of us on that, all from different companies, except one, our first lieutenant from my company.
Right.
He and I were the only ones from my company.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't much.
So when did you come home?
Well, the interesting thing about that, 7th Armored, of course, we were in occupation up in near Hamburg, in Leipzig, near the Baltic, with the British again, and then all of a sudden we were shipped down to Leipzig in the East Germany, Holly, and we commanded, took care of a German PW camp, 15,000. I was sergeant of the guard on that operation, and that was something, because I was called inside. They had a message for me, and the commander, whoever was in charge of that group, is a large group. These were permanent type barracks. And he handed me a stack of papers and said, "Take it to your commander." And I said, "Well, what is it?" And he said, "Well, you can read it. It's in English." So I read it. It was a petition. All these soldiers, many of them, had signed this petition to join the United States Army to fight the Russians. And I looked at this. I guess he was an officer. I said, "You know, they're our allies." He says, he just laughed at me, said, "You're going to find out." And anyway, we were in occupation one place and another, and until late November of 45. See, war ended in May. Here was November. And when the 7th Armored commander came to us right after the war, he gave us his little speech. He said, "The 7th Armored Division is going home. However, the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion will remain here in occupation." And we did. Until our battalion was disbanded in September of 45. And I was sent to the 893rd TD Battalion. Now, you remember Turney Leonard? That was his battalion.
I see.
Although I had heard nothing about what had happened in the Hurtgen Forest or any of their operations, but I was a platoon sergeant then, and the group I had, they were a little boisterous, a little trouble. And then later, we were transferred to the 644th Tank Destroyer Battalion, and that's the one I came home with.
I see. And
we left Marseille, came through Newport News, Virginia, and then on to Fort Sam Houston, and my discharge, I guess, was December 13th or so. 45. So.
And went back to A&amp?
Well, I did, but it was February. Let's say January, I guess. And so I came right on back to A&M, and in the meantime, I found out I couldn't hear anything. So I was examined by the Veterans Administration,
right?
And they awarded me 10% disability on hearing, which it was. I didn't think it was all that bad. There's a lot of ringing, you know.
Right.
But after a while, you get to where you can kind of live with that.
Right.
But here, I started wearing hearing aids back about 1980, and that helps. In fact, I couldn't do without, I guess. This ear is gone completely, but the last 3 years, it seems like I hear fine, but I don't comprehend anything. If I go to church, I can't understand a word.
I see.
I hear completely, but I don't understand it.
I see.
And
but you can understand what I'm saying now and everything. Okay.
Pardon?
You can understand me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's interesting. One of our reunions, who was a first lieutenant with our 7th Armored,
right,
his son-in-law is this General Petraeus, who's now running things in Iraq. And he cut a tape for us, a video. And believe it or not, I could understand every word he said. There was no closed caption.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of some people's diction can get through and some can't.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, when did you meet Rosemary? Y'all were married in '46.
Yeah.
Well, when did you meet her?
Well, let's see. I was back at A&M, and my real good friend from Rochelle, whose father had sent me a letter and all that, why I went to see him. He was in medical school, and his girlfriend was also in medical school, and she was a good friend of Rosemary's.
Right.
And so we were going to a fraternity party of some kind, or they were, and I was invited. And so they arranged for Rosemary as a blind date for me, but she was with her sorority and had something going on. So, but her aunt said, you know, you better think this over and go with this boy, which she did, and it made all the difference because we dated. It took us from March until last of June to get married.
Right.
Which that's fairly rapid, I guess.
Right.
But now, you know, this old Italian father, he says, no college degree, no MRS. And boy, she had to fight it. Well, she graduated from SMU one weekend, and the next weekend we were married.
I see. I see. And you finished at A&M then in '49?
49, yeah.
And then, when you stayed and got your master's?
No, I went out with the Soil Conservation Service for about, see, I changed my major to Range and Forestry. Then I went with the SCS out in West Texas for about 5 years. And of course,
so what's SCS?
Soil Conservation Service.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And, you know, it was a drought period. There wasn't much going on, and I was depressed and demoralized, and I said, I'm going to figure out something to do. I went to Houston and applied for all kinds of jobs, oil companies, Anderson Clayton, and seed companies and what have you. Then I said, well, I'll go by A&M, and I went over to Range Department. Of course, those old timers, old Doc Young said, yeah, we need people in the field, you know. We don't want them here, we want them in the field. So I went over to Ag Economics because Dooley Dawson, I believe that he was the one, I saw him at one of the banks. He was an ag representative at the bank. And he said, you know, we all go see Todd Tim, his department. They may have something for you. So I stopped by, visited with Mr. Bonin and Hunt, Dr. Hunt. And by the time I left, I had it sewed up that I would have an assistantship if I came back. And all I had to do was just get housing. Of course, by that time, we had 3 children, and we moved into College View. Of course, Rosemary looked and she said, my God, what have we done? But she worked for Cover, Mrs. Cover, Miss Cover, I guess it is, Rural Home Research for a little while, and then she got a real good job with oceanography. And she really liked that, and she made several voyages with them, you know, and so on. And I did okay with my little bit plus the GI Bill, and we got along. And then I graduated, and that's when I went to West Texas. And without a master's, I worked, got that degree in 56. Well, these old timers in that department, they wanted somebody to go to the field and do some work, and so they hired me, assistant professor with no other than a master's degree. And I did a lot of work with the ranchers in the Edwards Plateau area. I also worked in the upper Rio Grande Valley just on crop. That I did something on tomatoes in East Texas. And finally, you know, I'm a low man on the totem pole, and they expect me to get a PhD, and I don't know how I can go on half time and support this family. And so I took a job with the USDA Economic Research Service, and New Mexico State University. Well, it was great to be back in New Mexico. I love New Mexico. And I was there a couple of years doing the same kind of work I was doing here, until our supervisor got it in his mind that I needed to go to the University of California at Berkeley. He was at Davis, and he wanted me to move to Davis where I'd work on a grazing fee study, and then in the meantime take my coursework down at Berkeley. So eventually we had to move to Berkeley.
Yeah.
And I said, you know, this is not working out. Rosemary she worked for a little while, but then she was pregnant again, and we had 4 children. And I said, I'm tired of that. In the meantime, they called me from A&amp and said, how about coming back with USDA in our Department of Ag Economics? Which I said, well, that sounds good to me. I said, the other alternative would have been to go to Utah State, and my kids would have married Mormons, which might have been a good move, maybe. But anyway, we came back, but I had the hankering to get back overseas. And I took...
and you did. You spent what? Y'all spent about 10 years, right? Traveling.
Yeah, well, we lived together overseas 10 years altogether.
Right.
And I took a lot of short, by that I mean 3 months.
Right.
My first assignment was Iran. I had 3 months.
In Iran?
In Iran, then the next year 3 more months. Then Pakistan a couple of times, and finally in 79, I guess it was, they wanted me to go to Syria for 3 months, which I did, and then they wanted me to stay for that big project they had on ag assessment, and so I did. And Rosemary came over, and we lived there. We were there almost 2 years.
Yeah.
In Syria.
In Syria.
And our younger son came over. He was just enrolled at A&M as a freshman. And my older son was a Marine. He got his commission here in '76. But he was on Okinawa about that time. And that's when they got word that evacuating dependents out of Syria, you know. And the word came to my daughter in Austin, and she called our congressman there, Jake Pickle.
Right.
And by afternoon they said, well, your parents are fine. They're still in Damascus.
I'll be darned.
But then I got off of that, and then it came an opportunity for Southern Africa, for Botswana. But they didn't have a spot for me, so they put me on the payroll of the Ag Extension Service here, Texas Ag Extension Service.
Right.
And which turned out to be a good move. And we were there 4 years. And then came home, and I took some short terms like Ecuador and Yemen and Somalia. And then came the chance to go back to Southern Africa at Lesotho. That's a little kingdom surrounded by South Africa. And so I took that. And but I was a private contractor at that time. I was on my own. I'd worked for different, like Louis Berger, or then I worked one for Oregon State University. I don't remember what all. But anyway, we got back home from Lesotho in '93, and that's the last assignment. I keep looking every time that FedEx truck comes by. I think, here I am. Let me have something. It doesn't work that way.
No, it's for somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a fascinating life. Now, you've published a history of the 814.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Where is that? And it's been printed, what, 3 or 4 times?
This is the fourth run on it.
Wow. And this has it all. Are you in here a lot?
Well, I put myself in there probably more than I would otherwise. I filled in some gaps, some things that needed to be told.
Right.
And I used myself as an example. And I identified myself generally.
Right.
A couple of things I hid.
I'd like to borrow this and return it to you on Thursday if
Sure.
I can.
Yeah.
I'll scan some of
Right.
the photographs. And but you're identified where there's a picture of you.
Yes. There are several. Let me see. There, back in the back, there's biographical sketches.
I see you're right there, right?
Yeah, right there.
Yeah. And biographical sketches in the back.
Let's see.
Are these reunions?
We're I'm in those, some of those.
Yes, there you are right there, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we used to go to Savannah, Missouri.
Uh-huh.
And the thing about it, the one who organized the reunions was in my platoon, and he was a sergeant of the 2nd section, and I was the 1st section, and together we covered that battalion.
Right.
And we were just kind of minor characters.
Yeah, yeah. You used to be quite a bit bigger.
Yeah.
You were quite heavier than you are now.
I was, yeah.
You've lost quite a bit of weight, haven't you?
Well, I had some skin cancer last year, and I had a lot of treatments, and
that's
I lost some weight.
Yeah.
I think it's for the better.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, you look great.
And further on back, I think there's some, that like that. With
Yeah.
that little, there's my lieutenant. By the way, one of our lieutenants was Will Rogers, Jr.
Really?
Yeah, and I've got stories about him.
Wow.
I wrote an article about him for World War II magazine. And I spent a lot of time there at the memorial, Will Rogers Memorial in Claremore. And we found that he had his papers all organized and put in this, what he called his Panzerfaust war box.
Right.
And it's some interesting things about him.
Was his service though before he became a famous entertainer, or?
He had been, let's see, he was a member of Congress from California.
Right.
And he had had his military training, he had a commission. And then he got into Congress, and he helped with his soldiers' voting bill. That was his
there he is, right there.
main thing. And what I found out, just I knew about, but couldn't get any documentation. He was in a non-congressional committee, a group of people organized to bring the Jews of Eastern Europe into the U.S. using U.S. Jew money. And finally 2 bills were presented, and of course Roosevelt was lukewarm about it, but the State Department told Roosevelt, we're doing everything we can, for the Jews. But it got nowhere, and that is when he resigned his seat in Congress.
Right.
Had his commission reinstated, and joined us in England. And so he took over that 1st platoon of recon. I saw him occasionally, and he had a good record. And at Ruhr Pocket, there near the last, he wanted to command a gun company. He wanted 4 of those tank destroyers. And one of our lieutenants was sent home because his father had a brain tumor, dying. So they're going to send him home like Private Ryan.
Right.
And so Rogers took it over, but he got a severe shrapnel wound in his hip. And he was hospitalized and so on. And then after the war, he was campaign manager for Truman for California.
Right.
And then he ran for senator, but he didn't get the nomination.
Right.
Things just went against him.
Yeah.
But I met him on the plane or in Los Angeles. I happened to see him, and we sat together till he got off in Tucson. I was headed for El Paso.
When was this?
This was 61. And
did you know at the time that he'd been a member of the 814?
Oh, yeah.
You knew that?
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Right.
In fact, I had visited with him before that in '58 when he came here on the Great Issues program or something. He said, "Well, I'm not talking about a great issue. I'm just going to talk about my father, you know."
Right.
He said, "But I want to tell you something before I get started." He said, "I was leading a recon patrol through this area around Verdun, where the battles World War I, French and German and so on." And said, I was on the radio telling my platoon members, said, "Now, this is the way this battle was fought." You know, on and on. All of a sudden, somebody interrupted his speech. It was a colonel.
Right.
He said, "Okay, Rogers," he said, "let's fight one war at a time." And that he told that story, and then he said, "If you don't believe that, Cal Boykin's over there. He'll tell you." Well, that was kind of a Hollywood thing, because I had never heard that story, and I was not a member of his platoon, but it made a good story.
Yeah. Did he talk a lot about his father, or did he?
I was in touch with Andy Rooney when I wrote the article, because Andy Rooney was his speechwriter or writer for the program in New York City. He had kind of a Sidewalks of New York interview program, I guess is CBS.
Right.
And so Andy Rooney was his scriptwriter, and his assistant was Barbara Walters.
I'll be darned.
And so I put that all in my article, you know. But Rooney, he's pretty caustic.
Right.
He said, "I love Will Rogers Jr. And his real name was William Vann, V-A-N-N Rogers."
Right.
Somewhere along the way, he picked up the junior for show business or what have you.
Sure.
And he did play in a couple of 3 movies.
Right.
But
right. He wasn't quite the he wasn't quite the humorist that his dad was.
No, he was different sort.
Right.
And see, his dad wanted him to be more physical, horses. Well, they had their go at horses, but he was interested in literature and the arts and so on.
Right.
And but Rooney said, "Well, I visited. See, Rogers had his little ranch down at Tubac, south on the border, kind of an artist colony south of Tucson."
Yeah.
And he said, "But you know one thing about Will Jr. says he cannot get over the fact that he is the son of Will Rogers." It was just overwhelming, I think. And he, with his platoon, he had a little rope. He did a few rope trips and all.
Right.
But when we were on the plane from Los Angeles, he was telling me about Kennedy, what great hopes he had for Kennedy, and that Morris Udall, which one? Well, one of the Udalls was Secretary of Interior, and I think Rogers really wanted to be Indian Commissioner. But he said it wouldn't happen because both he and Udall were from Arizona.
Right.
And so anyway, we had a good discussion.
Yeah.
But at that time, I did not talk about the war. I thought, well, it's so bad.
Yeah, sure.
You know, people can't put up with it. Don't want to hear about it.
Right.
So I didn't say. Why in the world I didn't just? We got to talk about a lot of things.
Right. Right. Your daughter sent me an email and told me the story about Annie and Theo.
Oh yeah. Well, that's a long story.
I know it's a whole different story and all that. Do you mind if we well, first off, let me tell you that I had an idea after getting this from Ann and learning a little bit about you before I came, and if it's okay with you, I haven't done too many veteran shows that I have made 2-part shows. I'd like to do a 2-part show with you.
Okay.
If you have the extra time, we'll do 2 shows instead of 1 on Thursday, just right back to back. Because I just can't tell this whole story in 27 minutes. Can't tell it all in an hour, but we'll give it a try. Right. So I'd like to do 2 stories.
Sure.
And if you would, I don't want to spend a whole lot of time, but I just think it's a fascinating story with how how you and Rosemary became close with Annie and Theo, and obviously Annie was very important to you when you were a soldier. But I just think that it's a fascinating story, and then how it all sort of came together with the Good Morning America show in '89 and all of that. So just talk. She sent me a whole email about the story here, so I guess I kind of know it. But sort of your take on it.
When we left France, and we moved up just outside of Maastricht, but we were in Belgium. See, Maastricht's right down there, Belgium and Germany. They're kind of a little tip, and so we were offered to go on a night pass, evening pass, to Maastricht. Then I got word somehow that the English-speaking girls were putting together a dance for the 7th Armored. And of course I got out the gasoline that we had, washed my clothes, and got all dolled up, ready to go, and I went to Maastricht. Now, I don't remember anybody in my platoon going at the same time. These were older fellows, and I guess they were kind of playing it close with the wives at home and so on, and they were pretty loyal group. And so I got this dance, and right away I saw this girl, nice looking girl, and with a little blue dress, and I asked her for a dance, and we danced, I guess, practically all evening. And so she invited me to visit her and her family at home. And so the next time in, I guess I must have been an all-day pass or something, because I went into town. Well, there was a bridge across the river, and when they let us off the trucks, we had to cross that bridge, which was an old Roman bridge, but it had been damaged and it was being repaired. But you could cross over that bridge. In the meantime, these buzz bombs were just soaring overhead, going to Antwerp or Liège or wherever, or London. But anyway, I got to have the address. She'd written it down. Well, you know how the Germans or the Dutch or Europeans make a one. They put a little thing on it, Well, I thought it was a 7. So, and the street was Alexander Battalion. Well, I figured that was a great general, Well, he was a great violinist. But I got there, and I went to 71. She wasn't at 71. Her family wasn't either. But I said, well, what in the world? Didn't I turn around to go back? And a couple of GIs said, are you looking for something? Yeah, I said, I showed them that. I said, I said, 71, Alexander Battalion. No, he said, that's 13. So I went back, and sure enough, there they were. And her father and her mother. Now, her father was a chef at one of the big hotels, and he was quite successful, I think. But the mother, she just was very friendly. But the father could speak English, but the mother was German. And she was having trouble, I think, with Dutch even. But she talked to me in German, and I could finally understand her. She just really go after it. But Annie, she was the oldest of the family, and she had 2 brothers. One of them about 17, the other one about 14, I think. Now the younger brother was a kind of a scholar, like, well, Calvin, why are you fighting these Germans? Do you hate the Germans? And I said, well, I don't really hate them, but I don't like what they're doing here. And the other one, he was an entrepreneur. He had his plans, And it ended up, he would work for Dutch State Mines and made a great name for himself, I guess. But the younger brother was a school teacher, and he taught English to the Dutch kids. And but anyway, Annie and I went out a time or 2 or 3, and then all of a sudden we shipped out. And that's when we went up to the Roer River. And then when we were ordered back down to Belgium, I thought, well, maybe we'll pass through Maastricht. And well, we didn't. But during this time that I went to England, and when I got back to Verviers, I looked at the map and I said, heck, that's about 25 miles from Maastricht. So I got out and hitchhiked to Maastricht.
Now, when was this?
And this was in April 45. And I was supposed to be joining my outfit, but my trucks had not come to pick me up. So I'd run into Maastricht and visit with Annie for a few hours, or we'd go somewhere, then I'd have to run back. We did that several times, I did, and then I said, well, I'll probably never see her again. But then later, much later, during the occupation, I was in charge of a group going on leave to Brussels. And I was in the back with all my little ditty bag and so on, and the truck stopped and I looked out and there was a sign, Maastricht. We were right near the railroad station, at the railroad station, and Alexander Battalion I knew was only 2 or 3 blocks away, so I bailed out. I said, I'll see you boys in Brussels. So I stayed there. Her mother put me up for a couple of nights, and then I caught the train to Brussels. Now, what is amazing to me is how did I link up with those boys in Brussels?
Right.
How did I could have missed them, you know.
Sure.
Oh, everything could have happened. I could have been AWL.
Exactly.
Just like I was AWL in Edinburgh. But no. And if the boat, that Liberty ship had left on time, I would have missed it. I'd been AWL again.
Right.
But anyway, that was the last time I saw Annie. Well, in the meantime, she had given me a little cross, and I put that on my dog tags. And she's a very religious woman, very practical about things, but she was no nonsense about her. And I think she kind of got me on the right track. I really felt very close to her.
Right.
And like I was an advisor, somebody counseled with me. You know. And but being at that dance in the hall of mirrors and the chandeliers, and here we're smelling like gasoline, you know. I thought, God, this civilization is more than I can stand.
Right.
But anyway, we I guess it was when I got home. As soon as I got home, I told my mother, I said, those people need food, and they need some clothing, they need shoes. And so she boxed up some stuff and sent it, and then, well, we just kept corresponding. Well, she had a boyfriend, for sure, old Theo, and he was a safety engineer with Dutch Lake mines, coal mines. And where we had gone for showers at Haarlem, just north of Maastricht. And at that coal mine, you hang your clothes on a hook, and then you run them up to the ceiling, and where nobody can bother them, I guess. And but you get a hot shower, and you look. The medics say, keep yourself as clean as you can, because if you get hit, maybe you won't get the infections. And but I said, well, so far so good. But anyway, and in the process, long away, why Dutch State Mines went chemical and shut down the coal mines, and he was without a job. And he must have had a lot of connections. He had a lot of ability. He was a guitar player. He was on a radio program, you know, at the time, and with his little band of some kind, and had a good grasp of things. I have a picture of him and his twin sister greeting the American troops on the 14th of September of '44, when they came in and drove the Germans out of Maastricht. And she is sitting in the Jeep with the American soldiers. He's on the side with the American helmet on, you know. He was adventuresome. Both of them were. I never met Theo, although I always say, well, they were my good friends in Holland.
Right.
But I don't pick any bones, but we were serious.
Right.
And I wrote a letter to my father. It was a time when I saw a notice that I could get a discharge in Europe and go to work for the reconstruction program. Pay was over $2,000 a year, which is better than a buck sergeant's pay.
Right.
And I've got a copy of that letter somewhere. It goes on and on about I've torn up this country. I had my share in that. Now I want to have my share in building it back. But I never mentioned a girlfriend.
Right.
But and I think she was interested. I know her mother was. But and I remember saying, well, I'd probably post it in Brussels. But then I never heard before word came we were shipping home. And got home, and that was it.
Yeah.
But Phil, Ann mentioned that letter. They interviewed him in the May of '89.
Right.
I was in Africa. Rosemary and I were in Africa, and it was the day of my father's funeral. And he had told me long before, said, if anything happens to me, don't worry. You've got your things you need to do. It's a long way off and everything.
Right.
And I told him, I said, if anything happens to me, by God, you better come. That was my answer. But anyway, this program started, and they were interviewing Theo and a captain from the 30th Infantry, the old Hickory. They're the ones that liberated Moscow. And that old captain, he couldn't remember anything other than he thought the bread and the cheese was pretty good.
Yeah.
But Theo...
Now, were you watching the show at the time?
My grandchildren were.
Yeah, in Austin. Okay.
In Austin. And my son, older son, and he had friends in Phoenix. So he called them and came on an hour later there, so they recorded it.
I see.
So we have a copy.
Okay.
And they asked Theo, said, well, do you keep in touch with any Americans? Oh, yeah. Calvin Rosemary Boykin, College Station, Texas, 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion.
So he talked about y'all on the show.
Oh, yeah. And but the thing that impressed me, and I've got some of the transcript in this book, was that he said, well, everybody was all elated being liberated, and he said, but I could look over and see the trucks coming, bringing the bodies to the Margraten Cemetery for burial. That's the American cemetery between Maastricht and Aachen. And he had a feel. And he said, I could always tell the infantryman. He never smiles, he never laughs. But he said, I can tell the rest of you fellas.
Now Theo died, right? Is Eddie still alive?
He died, and he had a heart bypass, and then it got worse. And in '99, I think it was. Yeah.
Is Annie still alive?
And the two brothers that died, and sadly, even a son that she had. That she has a daughter and a son-in-law. And that's one reason I wanted to go back. You know, it may drag up a lot of memories and everything, and, you know, maybe have a negative effect, but things seem to go pretty well.
Yeah.
And Rosemary's been accommodating on all this.
Well, that's wonderful, because it's obviously before you ever met her was when you met. You pronounce it Annie or Annie?
Annie, I always E-N-N-Y, but it sounds like Annie to me. Yeah.
And she's still alive?
Yeah.
Annie's still alive?
Oh yeah. Well, we were 2 days with
on this trip.
On this trip.
Yeah.
We went early just because they were there.
Yeah.
She and her daughter and son-in-law and her sister-in-law.
Right.
And one of her nephews, and we all got, and one of her real good friends, who was, her family owned Hotel Beaumont in Maastricht, which was the headquarters of the 9th Army.
Right.
Now, Rosemary's uncle, Frank de Pasquale, he was class of 1930 A&M, and he was lieutenant colonel. And he was in the Inspector General's office in Maastricht with the 9th Army. And one of his jobs, or maybe his main job at one time, was to look after that cemetery at Margraten, make sure that things went according to Hoyle. They got a ceremony, they got proper IDs, stuff wasn't pilfered. I mean, it was a lot of stuff he had to look out for.
Yeah.
That's our visit with Cal Boykin
World War II, U.S. Army. Quite a story of service. Thank you for that service, Calvin Boykin, and thank you for your friendship. I'm Tom Turbeville.